Hey all, I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much. And I'm honored that you came to that workshop. My name's Bill Moyer, and I direct and help co-found an organization called the Backbone Campaign. Thank you. A group of artists, mostly from Vashon Island, were thinking with the Bush administration after 9/11, oh my goodness, if we don't do something, who's going to do it? You know, it's like, and all that privilege, a lot of time, a lot of creativity. And so we started an affinity group that did overpass banners and that sort of thing. And then in 2003, we had a retreat and decided, well, what do we do to, you know, put it up a notch and something more, maybe more thematic. And so, you know, thought about the 2004 Democratic National Convention, and wouldn't it be funny to bring a 70-foot backbone to the convention? But only those that you have to have a unique group of people that think about 70-foot backbones. But and then we thought, well, we could give backbone awards to people who stood up to the Bush administration, and you know, anyway. So that's some of the history. And some of you probably, how many have heard of Backbone Campaign before? A little bit of sense of that. Okay, great. So we quickly, right from the beginning, we tried to have make sure that our art and our spectacle was rich with content and analysis. My background, though, I am a percussionist, a drummer, but I'm also, I did do a little, like, you know, real political science and philosophy and American philosophy stuff. So, and I was an activist in college and in high school and college, and then I actually went to Big Mountain and did some solidarity work there in the 80s, and I went to Institute for Social Ecology, Murray Bookchin in Vermont to study that perspective on anarchism and the eco-anarchism, the idea that we're more social systems are more stable when they're diverse and like in nature. And so we can have all the good ideas in the world, but if we lack a social movement, the body, the people to manifest, the power to manifest those ideas, they're just ideas. And so for me, Backbone is way more about building a broad social movement, building power for regular people, and standing up for our own values and aspirations in the world we want, way more than it is giving politicians a backbone. I honestly not sure that, I don't think you really do that, actually. I don't think that's actually what happens. Okay, so in the beginning of the Backbone Campaign, I watched the Bill Moyer's show, and there's this guy Chuck Spinney on it. He's a former analyst at the Pentagon. He was the dude who in 1983 testified before Congress for a freeze of the Pentagon budget until they could pass an audit while he worked at the Pentagon.
Wow. He had some backbone.
He is serious backbone. Chuck Spinney's got serious backbone. So so I called him up and said, well, you were talking about the military-industrial congressional complex. And we're building the Backbone Campaign's platform and on defense spending, Vashon Island in the house. So so I asked, you know, could you help? And he said, sure, blah, blah, blah. And then he kept mentioning grand strategy. I'm like, what's grand strategy? Like, I didn't even know what's the difference between tactics and strategy at that point. I was just, you know, a drummer doing my best, activist guy. And I said, you know, Chuck, would you explain grand strategy to me sometime? And he said, sure, I have a free hour, 7 a.m. Next, Monday. So I said, okay, that's great. 7 a.m. Eastern time is 4 a.m. Pacific time. So I had to go out, and I live in a very small house. We slept in a loft at that point. So I had to go out to the car with the telephone and blankets and like talk to Chuck Spinney about what is grand strategy to understand what the heck he was talking about. And then he introduced me to the ideas that his mentor, Colonel John R. Boyd. And Colonel John R. Boyd was the person who wrote the first air-to-air tactics manual for the military. But he's also a person who did a lot of study of human creativity and the domains of conflict and the nature of conflict, and is credited with sort of updating Sun Tzu's Art of War. So I do believe that we are in a battle, and I know that in some circles that we operate in, we don't like the language of warfare, but we're going to have to put that one on the shelf right now, because I think the more we consider it, the more, because we're always chasing, we're reacting, we're activists, but sometimes we feel like reactivists because we're constantly reacting to things. So, but I think that, sometimes we can juxtapose, we can give the, what's the battle? Which is the battle? It's a battle of, we the people versus we the corporations. Sure. We did this giant We the Corporations on the second anniversary of the first anniversary of Citizens United. It's kind of fun. Do you guys want to read it together? Can you read it?
Oh, that's great.
Ready? Let's go. We the corporations, transcending the boundaries of nations, in order to protect us from the people, ensure our right to extract and exploit, provide the defense of profit with impunity, and secure the blessings of wealth and privilege for those who have it already, do ordain and appropriate this Constitution of the United States of America. So, we know that most of us, some of us have been able to take like a democracy school or something. So we have an inkling that the Constitution is not a revolutionary document, right? The Constitution enshrines the rights of property. And so, as we saw with, and a lot of us have been aware that, corporate personhood has been an idea for a long time, and that we wanted money out of politics even before Citizens United. But at Citizens United, the Supreme Court kind of did us a favor, sort of popularizing this idea of this inherent corruption in our system. And so in their paradigm, everything's for sale, right? Democracy's for sale, and actually it's been sold, right? This is the it's the first anniversary still of Citizens United. We had Blackie Waters and Goldie Sachs and Mona Santos there as this was the Emancipation Celebration for the corporation. And so we could, Goldie Sachs was like, finally, money talks, and I should know, First Amendment rights, yay. And then Mona Santos was like, that's fine, but we need Fourth Amendment rights for our privacy. And Blackie Waters was adamant that he would not be satisfied until corporations had their Second Amendment rights. So, yeah. So, oh my God, corporations are people, money is speech, WTF. So you'll see some of the creative tactics the Backbone does. Second anniversary of Citizens United, we rolled up in a rental van and shined a light. Rights are for people on the U.S. Supreme Court. That's a more complicated story that I'll get into later, or I won't, but later. Anyway, so then Occupy rolled around. Right before Occupy, Backbone, at our annual action camp, we created this. It's about a 70-foot long banner. Those are 5-6-foot weather balloons. So, in the system with this concentration of wealth and power, a few are getting. You know the story. So then rolls around. Of course, in a bought and sold government, of course they're going to sign treaties to enshrine the rights of corporations. Not just corporations, that's not really good enough. How about investors? Let's give investors rights. That's right. Oh, and yeah, that's probably not even good enough yet. So anyway, this is some of the tactics we did around the TPP. Early on, this is in a negotiation in Virginia. And this is on the golf course. So while the police were dealing with the tripod, we were rolling in with a moving van and pulled out the giant buttocks. We had made them. I've gotten a lot of these My Ass websites. So we got first one was Shared Sacrifice myass.org. And then the next, free trade my ass. But we've got democracy my ass, clean coal my ass, safe nuclear my ass, justice for all my ass, trickle down my ass. That one is unlikely to be used. So, So yeah, who said this wouldn't be fun? U.S. trade representative offices, we scaled them. They just conveniently set up scaffolding for us. So we put on our gear and we walked in. Actually, we had scouted it for a long time, for about 6 months. And we got to, because they just threatened to lock down, and they were so embarrassed, because it's right across the street from the executive administrative building. That's like super high security, but go figure. So rights of investors is not enough. They want rights for transnational capital. Like, it has to be able to cross borders unfettered. So in a paradigm like that, so why rights? So the other problem I was having over the years is that I wanted to work with a unifying framework. So the backbone had this unifying, this backbone with all the issues, and it's all related. We talked about a human rights framework and working within a human rights framework. But whenever I would talk about rights or human rights framework with folks, it kind of wouldn't get in. Like it kind of, yeah, all right, what about responsibilities? So we all accept a human rights framework, right? But it doesn't really quite work in terms of bringing people into growing our movement. And what do we assume to be true for something to have rights? Oh, go back to the real revolutionary document. Why do we have rights?
For the people?
Yes, and what did they say about, unalienable. They're unalienable, right? They're what else? Quote that document. Who gave them to us? God gave them. They're endowed by Creator, right? No, rights are derived from assumption of inherent value. For us, self-evident, endowed by Creator, unalienable. So if capitalism, if transnational capital, this is something that's just coming for me recently. It's like if transnational capital, what kind of frickin' value system allows transnational capital property corporations and investors to have sacred rights? What's sacred in that system? So it just occurred to me recently that maybe we should stop talking about capitalism as an economic system and start talking about it as a religion. It's a religion of the paradigm that we're fighting. It's the religion that can commodify everything and everybody because it can put a price on everything and everybody, because that's all it cares about. Because capital is sacred. It's not just this handy, efficient system. It's a freaking religion. So for our paradigm, what's sacred? Life. Life is sacred. And we shy away from saying that because, oh my God, if we say that, then we'll have to be anti-abortion or something. So we sacrifice our entire paradigm, the values, because we don't want to be confusing to people, because we want choice rather than life. I mean, no, we need to somehow get over that. Obviously, I'm not telling us to switch positions. I'm just saying that we can talk about the sacred. Because when we talk about what's sacred to people, it gets in. And then rights are just they derive from it. They're obviously, if it's sacred. And one of the things, and the reason I use this picture is because there was a Defend Our Coast rally in Victoria a few years ago, and I went up to it, and it was around the fossil fuel transport and Enbridge in particular. But the young Native people who spoke said that their elders were telling them that this is a spiritual struggle and it must be fought from a place of love. And that's the thing that started my wheels spinning around. Well, rights, So, in a sense, the going beyond rights is inspired by some First People's wisdom that we're pretty far away from sometimes. And so Backbone Campaign has done some support, imagery support for actions, and done our best to support our allies, First Nations allies. But the more I think about it, the more I love wins. We heard this a lot the other day, right? But we've been saying that now for a couple of years. What's the value of connectivity? And later on we'll get into why is that strategic? But if we're going to have that body that's going to manifest the ideas, we need to be connected to each other. And the value of connectivity, the best word I can get to is love. So how do we make change? How does change happen? So I'm going to go through a few ideas and lead us through then sort of into this more of the art of war stuff. And then I have some handouts. I just don't want to give them to you yet because they don't match exactly. And I just think it would become confusing. Political calculus. It's probably better than this, but whatever. Political calculus. So this is an interesting idea. I've heard it for years, and I didn't really think about it. And my brother, but at one time, I don't know, probably in the shower, I remember somebody said politics is the art of the possible, right? That's why you don't ask politicians to do things like Patty Murray, whatever, for this judge or that judge, whatever. During the Bush administration, who were the judges that were up for Roberts and Alito, right? Right, so on one of them, one of our senators voted for, the other voted against, or voted to, whatever, symbolic act of defiance. And then, but nothing changed. So they're in the art of the possible. My brother is a scientist. He said that he told me one time, in a trip across eastern Montana, which is very long, calculus is the mathematics of changing variables. So as an Evergreen grad, I kind of have to okay. I got away without it. Thank you. It's nice to have a brother who studied. But so when we ask politicians for favors, nothing changes. When we shift the variables, we change the calculus and it expands the realm of the possible. A more visual way of looking at this is like, okay, so this is the politically possible. Here's our sacred, unalienable rights of humans, communities, and nature paradigm. Here's the commodification of everything and everybody. They're competing for this middle ground, this space here. So, and we use tactics and demonstrations and campaigns to glorify, to celebrate and move our values into the realm of the possible. And we use tactics to toxify and decrease the power of our forces of oppression by making those things less toxic, more toxic to be associated with. That's another way of thinking about it. So we're trying to push ours in by changing variables. So some of the stuff, the first three are definitely from my Colonel John R. Boyd and Chuck Spinney. The last one's just something I've been thinking about in just sort of all the different kinds of, I've been really lucky. I've been able to travel around the country and work with activists, etc. Oh, and I didn't finish the thing on Moyer Island. Basically, they've been fighting about an industrial gravel mine going in on Moyer Island for a decade. And they were failing in the courts, they were failing in the legislature, and Moyer Island was getting, the Glacier Gravel Mine was getting, gravel company, a transnational from Tejeo Cement, transnational corporation, was getting permission to put in this 253-acre industrial gravel mine on Moyer Island in center Puget Sound. So when we engaged in nonviolent, principled resistance, we shifted the calculus because we earned so much media attention. It's not just symbolic, right? It's you start to insert in people's minds that this is an issue. You make it toxic for the politicians to be associated with a failure of allowing this island to be turned into a gravel mine. So anyway, we shifted the calculus there. I think recently we shifted the calculus a little bit on Arctic drilling. Like, we didn't win yet, but we had experienced a lot of victory in just 2 months of kayaktivism. Right now there's kayaktivists in Denmark, for goodness sakes. Yeah, it's really cool, right? So we're shifting the calculus and connecting the dots on Arctic drilling and climate change. And that one was just sort of handed to us. It was just too good to not do. So here we go to the meat of grand strategy. Simplified. Grand strategy, it's not a strategy to like a cookie cutter thing where you apply a template to a campaign. They're concepts for evaluating, principles for evaluating whether your tactics or your strategy or your campaign is being successful, is being strategic, is helping you build power. So the main one to remember, the first three pieces, I mean, which are just mirrored in number 2, is in order to create power for a social movement, you have to expand alliances. You have to increase the cohesion of those allies, and you have to deepen the resolve of our people. So you help people know that they're working from their truest, deepest values and aspirations. That you build a culture around it, right? That we're supporting each other. It's not just a thing we do on Saturdays, but it's who we are and our friends and our of that. We find ways to make connections between groups that we wouldn't otherwise necessarily be connecting with, and we do campaigns together and expand those alliances. So it's pretty simple, really. Undermining alliances of our adversaries. We've been working on this thing called solutionary rail. Part of it is to say to, there are forces in labor who want the just transition off of fossil fuels. They are just as suspicious of and more impacted than some of us by the corporations that they're dealing with, the refineries, the explosions in the refineries that kill their friends. So in a conference in the Bay Area and a conference here in Olympia, there were members of the Steelworkers Union who came in, who worked at the refineries, who were on strike, and they were with us along with the railroad workers and the environmentalists talking about what's the future of rail and how can it be safe for communities. Railroads are awesome. Railroads are efficient. Railroads could run on renewable energy. Actually, in 1928, we had 3 times as much railroad in Washington State. 15% of it was electrified over the passes and through tunnels. And it was doing regenerative braking, like the Priuses, right? On the way down the hills, putting power back into the lines.
Wow, regenerative braking.
I know, it's pretty amazing. And since 1915, they've been able to do regenerative braking on trains. So trains aren't the problem. It's what we move on trains. And when we built the freeway infrastructure, we subsidized a new way to move things around that with cheap fossil fuel prices. So all the discretionary freight, the high value freight, moved to the freeways. And what was left for the trains to move? Coal. And they didn't find a way to move people efficiently, and so the federal government took over, created Amtrak to subsidize rail to allow it to continue to exist. But now Amtrak actually pays like 90% of its bills through tickets.
Through what?
Ticket sales. So it's actually very self-sufficient. So now they want it back, probably. Now the corporation's going to want it back. So we want to undermine their alliances, decrease their internal cohesion, and weaken their resolve. And we use tactics that do that, whether through ridicule or very sympathetic moral action, and then the last piece of grand strategy, the main principles, is the end conflicts or win without sowing the seeds of future conflict. So what's an example of time when somebody won something but it created a new battle?
Egypt.
Yeah, okay, great. Iraq, yes. The Civil War, World War I. What about even something like the forest, the spotted owl? What if we thought about the spotted owl and thought, well, I mean, we kind of won something. Some big greens organizations won something in court, and they probably got a lot of boost in their fundraising and blah blah blah. But what happens when you go out to rural Oregon or Washington? Yeah, exactly. Then all of a sudden, instead of talking about sustainable forestry and sustainable agriculture and good jobs for generations, they're talking about spotted owls. Mm-hmm. So that's it. So one of the things that was really valuable with the discussions with the Pentagon folks, Chuck in particular, is this idea of there's domains of conflict. There's 3 that I know. Attrition is a physical game. So does anybody know where we're at in this picture? It's the last of the 3 movies, The Gates of Mordor. Yep. So those folks, they're kind of doomed, except for they've got a hobbit that's over here someplace, but mostly that's asymmetrical conflict there. They have no chance of beating this force. So attrition warfare presumes symmetrical power. And we are not in that kind of relationship with the powers that be. The forces of capitalism have basically a monopoly on the guns and a monopoly on money. To get money out of politics, to fight the cops in the streets. They're always going to win. They're always going to win because they always can put more money in. They can always get more violent. So attrition warfare also forces us to move out of our values and fight with tools that we don't actually, doesn't sustain the paradigm that we want. Maneuver conflict. Whenever we do something, we kind of get a momentary advantage. We surprise them. We climb the U.S. Trade Representative's office, or we scramble kayaks into some construction zone, or we get a momentary advantage. We create a chance to deliver our message to the people. And one of the examples in the military maneuver conflict was Blitzkrieg. The idea that you didn't have to have your whole giant battle formation, supported with all the support structures that are necessary for that. But you could have squads, where people go and test and probe the weaknesses of your opponent and then take advantage. And they could do that successfully because they understood what their mission was. They understood what their vision was, and they had goals, and they would go and try to achieve those goals with autonomy. We created momentary advantage down in Dallas when we got George W. Bush and Dick Cheney arrested by the Dallas police. We maneuvered them into place, and we tricked the police, and they finally arrested them. And it's a funny video. You'll have to look it up. Arrest Bush, Dallas. And we actually got into the Dallas Morning News, and the lead line was, Dick Cheney and George W. Bush and Dick Cheney were arrested this morning in Dallas at protests at Methodist University. No. Now, the fundamental domain of conflict that we're operating is moral conflict. We want there's a concept from the Pentagon actually called motherhood and mismatch. That we want our cause to be as close to motherhood or an unassailable good, so that anybody attacks it looks like a jerk.
Can you repeat that?
Yes. Well, luckily I have a handout too. It's motherhood and mismatch. The idea is that you want our cause, to be the moral equivalent of motherhood, or an unassailable good, if you don't like that analogy, motherhood analogy. You want it to be so profoundly good that when people attack you, they do themselves harm. So the other side, the mismatch part. So here's like putting here we were on an Earth Day celebration. The kids did a kind of symbolic blockade of the BNSF train. We celebrate what are motherhood issues we deal with, right? The water, the Puget Sound, salmon, right? So mismatch. So mismatch is like a triangle, and you attack the differences between what our opponent says they are doing and what they're actually doing, what they say is real and people's experience of reality, and who they are and who they say they are and who they actually are. This was a fun banner lift we did at the Tacoma Detention Center with Who Would Jesus Deport? WWJD. So exposing a mismatch. We also want to make our own mismatches as few as possible. Very esoteric. Harmonizing polycentric power into moral conflict. So, like in Blitzkrieg, the thing that gave people a sense that they could operate with autonomy was that they had their mission orders. They shared a vision, and I learned over time that tactics serves strategy, strategy serves goals, and goals serve vision. It's one way of thinking it. Tactics serve strategy, strategy serve goals, goals serve vision. So if we understand the essence of the conflict, if we understand the paradigmatic battle we're in, if we understand what's going to gain us affinity of the people, and and how to avoid mismatches, then we as a movement can do a better job building power for a movement. And it's the shared understanding of the vision, et cetera, that creates that harmonizes things. So
you're saying if we do the deep work of really understanding at the most fundamental level rather than the symptoms.
Yeah, I believe so. Yes, I believe so. And I believe that if we understand the nature of the conflict, that we can't, if we keep asking politicians for favors without building power, it's a waste of calories. If we keep just fighting the police in the streets, thinking that's going to, when our society, the people in our society don't, that's not what that resonates with them, then it's going to chase away support. I want grandma baking cookies for the blockade, not calling the cops on the protesters or the occupiers or whatever. So, as a movement, this is another thing that comes from the Pentagon. It's called the OODA loop, OODA. And it's just really a description of how we make decisions and what happens. But if you're a fighter pilot, it really matters the tempo that you go around here, because you're observing, you're seeing what's around you as best you can, just like we're trying to understand what's going on just as best we can with the information we can get. We're orienting, like where are we relative to the clouds and our adversary and whatever, the ground, etc. And then we decide the tactic that we're going to use, the maneuver we're going to execute. We do it, and then it's time to observe again. What's the impact? And then we have to do it again. Well, if we can do stuff faster, and we can, or if our opponent, or if we do this, if our opponents also, everybody's doing this. So if we can jump in and before they've acted, we can do a maneuver that causes them to reorient, have to reobserve and orient it before they decide what's next. And then we throw another thing at them. Then we can create, we can be in a tempo that's faster than their OODA loop and our OODA loop. So so this gets to some of this other values that we should be striving for from the Pentagon and Art of War stuff. One of them is variety. Here, I'm gonna skip to that part myself. So variety. We need a spectrum of tactics at our fingertips. We need in the same situation, Sun Tzu says, in the same situation, do it differently, so you don't become predictable. The rapidity, the capacity to act with a speedy mobilization, unencumbered action, fast deployment. There's an aspect of this is that Napoleon said, in French, of course, audacity, audacity, audacity. You have to keep acting with ways that people would just not expect you to do that. Why did they do that? How could they have climbed right in front of our own scaffolding? Why did they? How could they? What do you mean? 300 kayaks. Yeah, what a brilliant move, right?
Beautiful, yes.
Yeah, audacity. So initiative, related to the above, but a sense of authority to act and shape and frame perceptions. We're gonna shape this thing. We're gonna shape the conflict. We're gonna define what's going on here. I think that's maybe with the Shell No stuff, that was part of what we were doing well. And then harmony, through shared theory of change, lexicon, vision, goals for autonomous action, to use and exercise their initiative. People, we have to do this in an autonomous movement that's not centrally led. We can't be waiting for orders from Washington, D.C. or the Backbone campaign. But it's by sharing these understanding of the essence of the conflict and how to fight it strategically that we can engage and we can harmonize our actions. So this is just action camp this year is actually, that's not this. We're doing an action camp August 11th through the 17th this year. So now skipping to the next section. So another thing I've been thinking about with, and when I meet people, not everybody's an activist, but that doesn't make them not a change agent. And part of the problem of harmonizing this disparate movement is honoring the fact that, boy, we could learn a lot from community organizers. We kind of know that. But cultural workers, wow, we don't necessarily always think about the cultural workers, the people who are doing the anti-oppression work, or the people who are doing this, creating a sense of place. And how do we create a sense of place in our work? You know, the paddling on the water, that was an incredibly useful for creating a sense of resolve and place. But what, and I don't like, I'm going to get rid of that stupid pioneers word.
Right now.
Yeah, I'm going to do it right now. I guess I'm not going to do it right now, because I think if I do it, nope, see, that's what happens. When I edit this, it's going to, on here it doesn't say pioneers anymore. It says a new society practitioners. We should be celebrating the people who are doing the tool libraries and the organic farms and the media and the transport, all the solutions. Because we have to be a propositional movement as well as an oppositional movement. We have to be about resilience as well as resistance. So that's a really important that we celebrate that and we work that into and we build those relationships. Not that we can all do everything, but we should honor that everyone here is a change agent. The storytellers. So Martha, who writes for Crosscut, right? Alex Garland shoots photos of demonstrations. Our friend Todd Boyle, who's got cameras in more than one room today. They're telling the story. They're helping us tell a story out to the world and to ourselves. So I think of that as sort of sectors of agency. So I think like Sweetwater Nanook is an amazing cultural worker. I think she's doing incredible work in that regard. So here's some activists. We got Black Bloc and the students, ASB society, the student government working together on a thing. That was kind of fun. This is an action down in Gulfport. No, it's in Biloxi, Mississippi, where, and I'm not even totally sure what, these are activist examples. So some of our tactics that we use, Safe in Seattle, it's getting going. There's, cultural work. Here's Sweetwater doing her great work. So we did a credit union organizing project on Vashon. People were so excited about it that we almost had to do it. But the problem is it's really hard to start a credit union these days. So what ended up happening is an existing credit union, an employees-based credit union, heard about our work, and we went into negotiations with them, and they moved a branch into our community. And since then, in the last 4 years, we've moved $30 million, more than $30 million, a quarter of the deposits at least of Vashon Island, out of the Wall Street banks and into the credit unions. Wow. And now instead of having three banks and no credit unions, we have 2 banks, an ATM, and 2 credit unions. And so PSCCU and a bunch of us are on the board of the credit unions, and a $90 million credit union. So that was a cool thing. So just like a solution piece. We actually took the former Chase manager away. She retired and then the next week announced that she was going to be the manager of the new credit union. This is a solutionary rail idea that I was referring to about, presenting solutions for transport. How do we reinvest in the commons? Well, the solutionary rail idea is that the public owns the electrification infrastructure and charges the railroads for it. Yeah, and we used to be that every community that the railroads went through was served, right? That it would stop there. But now that's inefficient. So another thing that's great about electric rail, I learned, was that it's 15% more efficient in general just because it's faster at stopping and starting. And so it has an inherent efficiencies in it that allow it to do that, to make more stops. Where are we at? What time is it? I should know.
It's 2 o'clock.
Okay, thank you.
2:45, is that?
And so now we have some time to have a discussion, right?